Hello friends, welcome back to Books and Jams. My name is Krista and I'm so glad that you are here in my messy library. My library that is soon to be undergoing some change. I am just waiting for the bookshelves I want to be in stock at IKEA. So I have some empty shelves, some crowded shelves. We're just here in the midst of it all. Today, I am starting off my wrap up of the year with my reading year in review. In the next week or so, I will also be sharing with you some videos about my favorites in some different genres. But today we're going to just talk about all the stats and all the numbers. I never used to pay attention to any of the stats, any of the numbers until last year when I became a patron of the Currently Reading podcast. And one of their hosts, Katie, puts together a fantastic, very in-depth spreadsheet that I've been using now for 2 years, and I love it. You can adjust it to make it fit what you want. You can track lots of things or just a few things. After using it this past 2 years, I am going to adjust how I use it in the next year, and she has made a lot of changes to it, which I'll talk about some of those as we go along. But I have some stats from Goodreads as well as from my spreadsheet, and we're just going to talk about how my reading year went in the year 2021. First of all, I read a total, according to Goodreads, a total of 204 books. That's amazing. Amazing and kind of ridiculous. I don't think I will have that high of a year again. Although in 2020, I did read 193, I think. But the last 2 years, we've been home a lot extra because of the pandemic, and I am making a very intentional effort to read fewer books in 2022. That is one of my plans for the year. So I'm hoping that my number goes down. I'm determined to make my number go down in 2022. But my total number of books was 204. My total number of pages read was 67,660. That's amazing. I don't track pages when I read. I don't ask when I do live reading sprints how many pages people read because I just never pay attention to pages when I'm reading. But the longest book that I read in 2021 was Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. My copy of that had 1,463 pages. And I read all of them. I listened to a lot of it on audio, but I read it and took the time. It was long. I did it as a group read with a bunch of other booktubers, and it was so much fun to do it in a group with others and be able to hear some discussion and what others are thinking about it. Yeah, it was a good experience for sure. The shortest book that I read in 2021 was Sarah Plain and Tall with only 64 pages. Very, very short. My average number of books per month was 16, actually almost 17, which is a lot. And that number will go down next year for sure. But in March of 2021, I read 33 books because middle grade March, and I was trying to read a book every day, and I did it. I completed 33 books in the month. Whoa. My average rating for all of my books that I read in 2021 was 3.8, which fits. I am a fan of 3 and 4 stars. I give a handful of 5 stars. I'm not super stingy with my 5 stars, but I am super stingy with my 2s, and I never give a 1. I think I might have had only 2 or 3 2-star reads this year, and I don't remember the last time I've given a 1 because I just won't read it if I'm not enjoying it that much that it's going to be a 1-star read. I will DNF it. There was a couple NetGalley books that I was really not enjoying, and I DNF'd those. I don't DNF a lot because my book picker has gotten better over the years, and I often will just read books that I know I'm going to like. Clearly, because I'm giving most of the books I read 3 or 4 stars, 3.8. Now, that is all the information that I know from Goodreads, or that I care about from Goodreads. So all the rest of these things, I do have some fun graphics to share with you because one of the perks of using a fun spreadsheet is you get the charts. The first stat that I'm just over the moon about, because for the last couple of years, I've done my goals the same way. And the main purpose for the goals that I choose each year is to read the books off my shelves. I want to encourage myself and give myself different ways or highlight different books that are on my shelves because that's the goal, to read books from my shelves. And in 2021, I read. 71.4% of books that I read were all from my shelves. Here's the little graphic. So it's a nice big chunk of the books that I read were owned books. Then library and Hoopla kind of go together because Hoopla is connected to my library, but the next biggest chunk, 23%, 23.2 and 3.9% are from the library and Hoopla, and then just 1% from Scribd. Often I was reading a book that was already on my shelves, and so I would mark it as owned TBR. So I did listen to more than 1% of my books on Scribd, but for the sake of this graphic, I wanted to know how many books I read off of my owned TBR. This is something that's changing in the spreadsheet for 2022. I will be able to mark the source where I read it and separately mark if I own it or not, which I'm really excited for, because then I will be able to have a more accurate account of where I'm getting the books from, but also have this percentage of how many I read off of my shelves. So I'm really excited about that. She has kind of separated those two things out. These numbers are not completely accurate because I often listen to audiobooks of books that I already own. So the audiobook percentage isn't on there. But speaking of audiobooks, let me get that real quick. As far as format, I read more audiobooks than print books this year. I read 101 audiobooks, which is 49.75%. I read 84 books in print, which is 41.38. And then a multiple format, which means maybe I started it in print and then switched to the audio or vice versa. That was 15 books, which is 7.39%. And then digital was a lowly 3 books, and that's 1.48%, which does not surprise me, but I am also hoping to change that in 2022 because I would like to be more on top of my NetGalley, and that means I have to actually read them digitally because many of them are not even available yet, because I would like to get to the point where I'm reading them ahead so that I can talk about them as they get released, which is the point, the true point of NetGalley, to review these upcoming releases. So that's kind of fun. I did not realize that I had listened more than I read, although if I do think about it, that makes sense. I do listen to a lot of audiobooks and I love it. It will be fun next year to have a graphic that shows a little bit more of that reality of how much I actually listen to audio and where I'm getting my audiobooks from. Honestly, right now it's from Libby app, the library, Hoopla, and Scribd. I use all 3 of them consistently. Okay, the next fun stat is my genre breakdown. This is the one that in 2020 I was so shocked by. I think in 2020, I had read more fantasy than historical. That is not the case this year. My largest percentage is general fiction, which is just kind of anything that didn't fit into any of the other categories. That's 50 books and it's 24.63%. My second largest is just 1 book short, 49 books was historical fiction. So it's 24.14%. Then fantasy is my third, and that's like any kind of retelling. I didn't read a lot of epic fantasy or high fantasy or anything like that this year. But anyways, I have 26 fantasy books, 12.8%. Then romance, I have 21. I did read through all 8 books of the Bridgerton series, and I do read romance here and there, apparently more than I would have thought, I guess. 10.34. Romance is the next category. I read 21 romance. Surprise, surprise. And I guess I read all of the Bridgerton books. That's 8. And I do like a romance, especially like as a palate cleanser in between other things. A rom-com is right up my alley, and that's 10.34%. What did surprise me on this list that wasn't there last year is classics was my next biggest, and that's 14 books at 6.9%. But what made this number bump up so high is that I did read a bunch from my Newbery shelf, which is this shelf here. And on this half of them, they're all pretty old. And so I just marked them as classics rather than any of the other genre categories. That's why my classics is at 14. I did not read 14 like heavy duty classics, but I did read some fun ones this year. And then right below that is mystery crime at 6.4%. And then sci-fi has 10, 4.93. I don't think sci-fi was even on the list last year, maybe. But I only talked about fiction for this graphic. I am going to do a whole separate video where I rank all of my nonfiction books that I read this year. It's 21, and I'm going to put them in order from least favorite to favorite nonfiction books. And I'll talk about why I'm doing that in that video. But so stay tuned for some more nonfiction information from me. But all of those are just my fiction categories. Something that I found interesting that I was able to track this year. I think this is higher than any other year, but I read 16.4% new releases this year. I'm a queen of backlist. All of these books are backlist for the most part. I do not buy new releases. I get new releases from NetGalley and the library and Book of the Month, but most of the books that I read are backlist, so it makes sense that 83.6% are backlist. But I was pretty impressed that 16.4% were new releases this year, were 2021 releases. So that was pretty cool and higher than I maybe would have thought. I did read mainly from female authors. I read 81.3% female and 18.7% male. That doesn't surprise me. It's not something I intentionally choose to do. I don't purposefully read female authors or avoid a book because it's a male author. Like, that's just something that this spreadsheet tracks, and so I found it interesting that, once again, it doesn't surprise me because my favorite genre is historical fiction and middle grade. I find that a lot of those two categories of books are female authors. There are male authors who write in both of those genres, but I would say that a much higher percentage of authors in those genres is female. So that's why those are the two biggest areas that I read. Speaking of which, the last graphic I have to share with you today is audience. I read 59.6% adult books this year. And the next biggest chunk, of course, is middle grade, 32.5%. And then a very small chunk is YA, which is 7.9%. And I am 100% sure that if I had not read the Lunar Chronicles, that would have been way smaller, because I don't read a lot of YA, but I do read a ton of middle grade and adult. So that fits right along with what I would have thought. So I don't really have surprises this year. It's fun to see my reading in this way, being able to see the pictures of the graphics and just kind of notice different things along the way. Oh, one more thing I was going to talk about. It's not on here. So I guess audience was not the last thing. The last thing is the longest book by month. I like tracking this. I don't know what it is that makes me feel intimidated by big books. I know it's not because I'm trying to get to a certain number of books, because I don't care about the quantity of books. I think it in part is because there are just so many books I want to read that the idea of a big book taking up a little bit more time is daunting, just because there are just so many that I want to read. But I did notice in 2021 that in the first half of the year, I only had 1 month where I read a book over 500. The rest of the months, the longest book was below 500. However, in the second half of the year, every month, all 6 months, had a book that was above 500 pages. So I did kind of dive into bigger books towards the end of the year. This was not something that I intentionally did or consciously made a decision to read bigger books. And to be honest, the majority of those months, probably that big book was the Lunar Chronicles books. I think all of them, with maybe the exception of one, are 500 pages or more. I know Winter is 800 something pages. I also read Les Mis, which is the highest page count book in September, but honestly, that took me 3 months to read. I started that, I think, in July. So it doesn't really matter how many pages are in a book. I'm trying to not be as intimidated by big books. And actually, in 2022, because one of my goals is to slow down, I am going to be reaching for some of those bigger books. Maybe once I finish what's on my actual TBR for the month, if I still have time in a month, I will pick up some of these bigger books that have been on my shelves for a while, and in hopes of kind of slowing my roll a little bit. So that is my year in books, according to the numbers. That is the stats and the information about my reading. I don't feel like there are any surprises this year. I'm glad to see historical fiction up there higher where I feel like it should be. It reflects my reading a lot more. Yeah, it's fun to look at my reading in graphics as opposed to just as a list of books. So I do appreciate having the spreadsheet for that. I would love to chat with you down below. How do you feel about big books? How do you feel about stats? Do you track your reading at all? Do you like hearing the stats of other people's reading? I don't know. Let's chat down in the comments. You guys know I love talking with you down there. Stay tuned for some favorites lists, as well as some other end of the year kind of wrap up stuff coming your way very soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you very soon. Bye.